Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Is it possible to find one watch to rule them all? One watch that does everything one could hope for from a watch. Now, I'm not suggesting that if we do find one, then you can't own any other watches. Heaven forbid. I'm just asking if it's possible to find one watch that would mean that you don't need to own any other watches. Now, of course, there are $100 Casio digitals with compasses, temperature sensors, thermometers, stopwatches, alarms, world times, and teasmades probably. But what about mechanical watches? Is it possible to find a relatively affordable mechanical watch that still has heaps of utility? Well, how does all of this sound? A regulated 3-hand Japanese automatic with a 45-hour power reserve, a power reserve indicator on the dial, a date complication, a day-night indicator, a dive time bezel, a GMT bezel, a compass, cracking loom, and a very specific 120 meters of water resistance. All in one watch. Well, yes, it's possible because I'm wearing it right now. It's by Swedish brand E.C. Anderson and it's called the Poseidon. These Anderson watches have a bit of a cult following because they look like nothing else on the market and because they combine about 4 watches in one. You saw the pop-up? This video is sponsored by E.C. Anderson. I've been chatting to Eric Anderson, the brand owner, for a while now about having a look at one of his watches, and he sent me this one in late August this year. I'll leave a link in the description of the video to his website if you're keen to check out one of these for yourself. So, how does the watch manage to pack in all of those features into its 40mm diameter case, and does it end up looking like an orc's breakfast as a consequence? Let's flip the camera and find out. Alright, let's get into it with a brief look at the packaging. It's a fairly simple black cardboard box. It's only worth the briefest of looks anyway. It's nice to see a 2-year warranty though, and even nicer to see a bonus 3rd year if you register the watch online. They're only selling 120 of these. I would imagine all 120 owners will do just that to claim that extra year. And there really is nothing else out there that looks quite like one of these E.C. Andersons. They have an immediately recognizable case shape, I think. Chunky and angular, but with almost hidden lugs. I also think the dial looks pretty clean despite the addition of 3 complications. Perhaps the decision to stick with a simple colour palette helps with that. What you can't feel, but hopefully you can still get a sense of from this footage, is how chunky the watch is. It's rock solid. It's supposed to be built for anything, a proper adventure watch, and it genuinely feels like it could take a serious walloping without any issues. So the case shape is unusual. How does that translate to on-paper dimensions? Well, this one is 40mm in diameter with a thickness of 13.4mm. Apparently the flat sapphire crystal is 2.4mm thick in itself. Lug tip to lug tip is fine at 48.5, and slightly unusually it has an 18mm lug width. Now, don't switch off quite yet. The choice to go with a smaller than expected strap is definitely part of the look overall. I was initially skeptical, but on wrist it makes sense, as you'll see later on. Weight on the supplied rubber strap is 111 grams. So the watch has high polished sides with drilled lugs. Only the rubber strap is supplied, but I'm sure this would work quite well on a slim single pass or very slim double pass nylon. The bezel though is just vast. It's just as thick as the case actually. The case is really slim when you look at the watch in profile. I guess the bezel has to house that sapphire somehow. It has a satinized finish, seriously grippy machining to its edge, and you can see the slope of the ceramic insert as well. The upper lug surfaces and crown guards have the same satinized finish as the bezel. It's a 7mm guarded crown with the E.C. Anderson stylized hourglass logo etched into it. There's nothing particularly fancy going on here, it's all very purposeful, which is rather the point. I'm not convinced by the rubber strap though. It smells good and feels like it will last for ages, but what's with those 2 lines running horizontally about 2 centimeters from the spring bar positions? I don't know, and I've never had to punch my own holes before. Plus the hardware is high polish. Now I know the sides of the case are also high polished, but I would have preferred this one to be satinized like the upper lug surfaces and like the crown guards. Apparently it's Italian in origin, made by Bonetto, who make OEM rubber straps for a lot of other big brands, but I'm not overly impressed with it. It's easy swap though, as I'll show you later on. The case back is screw-on and high-polished stainless steel, and as well as the usual spec sheet, it has instructions on how you use the watch dial as a compass, just in case you're in a survival situation and you've forgotten. Basically, as it shows you there, you twist the bezel so that the double marker is located between the hour hand and the 12 o'clock, point that hour hand towards the sun, and then refer to the day-night indicator. If the north triangle is pointing to orange, then the single orange marker is pointing to the north. If the north triangle is pointing to white, then the white double bezel markers are pointing to north. I strongly suggest you do your own research though if you intend to rely on this in a survival situation. Now behind that case back, they're a little circumspect about what movement is actually fitted to this watch, referring to it only as a Japanese automatic. They're right, it's a Miyota 9134, 26 jewel hacking and hand winding with a date at 3, power reserve at 9:30 and a day-night indicator at 6. Factory tolerances are -10 to +30, but Anderson claim they regulate these. This one is doing okay, no complaints about its performance. No complaints about the bezel either. 60 click bi-directional, easy to grip thanks to the fact that the bezel extends beyond the case. It's a big chunky bezel. As discussed, not only does it have dive markings on the inner edge, it also has the capability of tracking a second time zone on the outer edge. You just have to read as you see fit using the minute hand or the hour hand respectively. It feels good and it sounds good. And as discussed, I think they managed to pack all of that utility into a fairly compact watch and managed not to make it look like a total mess. I'm delighted they resisted the temptation to tell you about all of the features by printing it on the dial like you see so often. Automatic, chronometer, chronograph, all of that stuff completely unnecessary. Can you imagine what this watch would look like if they'd tried to advertise all of those features? It would just be full of text. It's a flat, rich, gloss black lacquer dial, high polished silver surround applied indices, big rectangle at 12, squares everywhere else, very simple circles for the minutes around the outer edge just painted on. The hands are also very simple, rectangles, dead flat, perhaps slightly boring. They are pretty easy to spot though against that deep black dial. The date wheel is colour matched. The power reserve meter is the smallest and neatest I've ever seen, and I'm a big fan of the day-night indicator. But I have seen something similar somewhere before. This is a Blancpain 50 fathoms mil-spec, which features a very similar bicolour disc, but on the Blancpain, the whole disc changes to orange if there has been water incursion into the case. It doesn't actually rotate. I love how Eric has taken that look and incorporated it into his own design, but made it work for him as a 24-hour indicator and as a 2-stage compass. Bezel markings are small because the bezel is doing two things at once, but the fact that they're painted white helps keep everything fairly legible despite those small numerals and small markings. All of those small markings though are filled full of delicious BGW9 Superluminova. In theory you can use both the dive time bezel and the GMT bezel component after dark. Compass, not so much, fairly obviously. Most of the bezel markings are still hanging on in there even at the end of my test, but the hands and the indices are doing really well. No problems getting a read on this one after dark. But how does this oddity wear? And what about that choice to go for 18mm lug width? Well, I think it was a good choice on balance. I've got an average size 7-inch wrist, as I'm sure you know well by now, and I think it looks fine on me. It feels fine on me as well. As you can see looking down the wrist how chunky this thing is. But it's not massively heavy or unwieldy. You also get some nice light play from the flat sapphire and from that angled ceramic bezel insert, but the watch remains easy to read thanks to plenty of AR undercoating. I'm sure they could have gone for 20mm lug width, but I'm not looking at my wrist wishing they had. It's barely noticeable in reality. And a pocket shot to finish. Again, plenty going on here to catch the eye. Not a watch you'll be wearing with a suit and tie though. Jeans and t-shirt, much more its thing. Moans and niggles. Well, that strap's a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, it smells good and it's going to last for a while. But the hardware looked and felt out of place, all of which had me reaching for a Barton Elite Silicone that I bought specifically for this watch. And let's be honest, it's not what you describe as a pretty watch, is it? Tooly, yes. Purposeful, yes, but not pretty. I think they've actually done quite a good job of integrating all of those features into its relatively compact form. I do like the day-night indicator, but maybe the hands could have done with some syringe tips for extra legibility or something to break up those basic rectangles. And there are a couple of small quality control niggles with this specific watch. The tip of the minute hand has a small blemish which does catch the light occasionally, as you can see here. And I'll admit I don't speak any Swedish, but I think there's an extra accent over the E in Gothenburg that shouldn't be there. And 120 meters of water resistance? Sufficient for most people, I'm sure, but very, very specific and perhaps slightly undercooked for a watch named after the Greek god of the sea. And then there's the price. It should always make you a little suspicious if I haven't talked about price up front. These have been on a sliding scale whereby the more they sell out, the more the price goes up. Okay, perhaps that enticed people to buy early, I don't know. You're looking at around $850 for one of these as it currently stands. Now this is in many ways a unique proposition. They're only making 120 of them, and I've got one, so that makes 119. And there just aren't any other watches on the market that try and do as much as this one is trying to do. It does the work of 4 watches, but it costs the same as about 2 of those watches. For sure, there are plenty of other dive watches or tool watches on the market with a Miyota 9000 series costing $400-ish. So it's up to you then to decide whether or not what you see here justifies spending a little bit more on this one. But full credit to Eric for what he's trying to do here. His watches look like nobody else's watches, which I think is remarkably difficult to do. They're small batch, very robust feeling, very solidly constructed, can handle pretty much anything you throw at them, and if you know of a mechanical watch under $1,000 that does more than this one for less, then I want to hear about it, and I'd be seriously impressed if it exists. So there you have it, a really, really interesting watch, I think, this EC Anderson Poseidon. There's nothing else on the market that looks quite like it or has the same feature set as it, but I did feel it was a bit raw in certain areas like the strap and some of the finishes, and it may combine the features of 4 watches in one, but it costs about the same as 2 of those watches. Nonetheless, a bit of a unicorn, and all credit to Eric for that. If you don't fancy this one but want to keep it Swedish, why not check out my review of the Tuseno Shellback or the Bravur Scandinavia. Thanks for watching, I hope to see you all again in a future video.